The Buffalo Sabres are preparing to trade JJ Peterka. It seems like they're at an impasse, and trade is the only option. Should the Jets be in on this? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have some fun to talk about. I want to chat about a lot of different teams the Jets could trade with, a couple of big updates for one of the biggest names on the trade market right now, JJ Peterka, and maybe some teams that have centers that we haven't chatted about, but maybe there's a reason that we're not talking about those centers. All coming right up on tonight's episode, but of course, let's start off with JJ Peterka. So the Buffalo Sabres have not exactly been a good team lately. I don't think that's not really a shocker to anyone who's actually followed the Atlantic Division, who's heard about the Sabres kind of having some internal strife. Sounds like a lot of players on this team are not very happy. So, the Sabres kind of need to do something, right? And sometimes that's more of a threat to the fan base than maybe it looks, but Buffalo needs to make a change, and probably a very big change this coming summer. Now, one of the biggest names that's really started to circulate on the trade market is JJ Peterka. Elliot Friedman has pointed out that apparently the Sabres now are really gearing up to trade him. They're kind of at an impasse with him. He doesn't really sound like he wants to re-sign, which I guess given the Sabres situation is not super shocking. But because of that, there's not really a lot that they can do. Yeah, they could hold on to his rights and try and wait it out, but it just really doesn't feel that productive, right? You've got a 23-year-old RFA who's expiring this summer. You got to do something about this, right? And the Sabres are kind of in this weird spot of a lot of the guys that they currently have under contract kind of being in the mid to late 20s or even early 30s. And so this team has some sense of urgency to make something happen. Something could be bad in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. I think you want to be careful when we're talking about what that something is. But if you're the Jets, this feels like a very interesting situation for you to be monitoring, because it's not just Peterka that's on the move. We're hearing that Alex Tuch could also be out there. And for the Jets, this is probably one of the best potential one-stop shop sorts of spots you could find. Now, in terms of, who could be on the move, Tuch and Peterka are probably two of the easiest names that I think I would look at. Peterka is going to cost you an arm and a leg. And it's not like Tuch will be cheap either, but Peterka in particular, he's a young 23-year-old RFA. Now, I guess the good news is that you're talking about a guy who's disgruntled and wants out, so you might have some leverage to a point, but I think pretty much everyone out there who has any sense of being able to bring Peterka in for, $7-8 million is immediately going to be pounding the phone lines, calling up the Sabres and asking what they want for him. He's a great player. He's got positional versatility, posted 60-plus points last year. Easy decision for me to pursue this guy, especially when you're Winnipeg and you actually have a real spot for him. Now, the trick with Peterka is that he'd actually have to want to sign with the Jets, and that could be a challenge. I will say that I feel like the mood and sort of the perception of the Jets over the past year or two has really started to shift. And maybe, guys like Brock Nelson turning the Jets down aren't indicative of how some of these younger guys who perhaps grew up elsewhere or even outside the U.S., maybe they see Winnipeg. Maybe they don't really care about some of this stuff. He doesn't have a family, as far as I know, that he has to really manage and make sure that they get to good schools and stuff. So he could actually be in an okay living spot to try and, make something happen. Maybe he's a little easier to convince. Anywhere has to be better than Buffalo at this point, right? It's not like he's living in the most glamorous city with the world's best team. He's on the Sabres, and Buffalo is a cool place, but it's not like the most exciting spot ever, right? So I look at Peterka and I feel like there's a real opportunity for the Jets. And I kind of wonder if this is where the Gabe Velarde situation comes in, right? Velarde hasn't signed his extension yet. And the longer it goes, the more I wonder just what his situation is. Uh, Velarde kind of could be a Buffalo player. Maybe, you've got a big scoring winger with a pretty great shot. Maybe, a swap of RFAs is what kind of gets this done. Obviously, the Jets would probably have to add on their end because we're talking about Velarde versus, an even more promising youngster. But Velarde has a lot of value, and I could see maybe a trade here making a lot of sense for both parties. The Jets, with their wing depth, are a little more secure than they are with the center depth, and a Peterka addition could really transform Winnipeg's top six and maybe even help fix the top line, right? The top line right now has kind of been all over the place, and if you swap out Velarde for somebody and maybe move Peterka to your 2C spot, I don't know, man. I'm seeing some real potential here, and it could make a lot of sense for both teams. The Jets give them a really good prime-aged player who's maybe got some cosmetic challenges, but is still very good and is absolutely lethal on the power play. And the Jets get a promising young RFA who could immediately improve the Jets in the present and the future, especially down the middle. So, there's a lot of intrigue. If Winnipeg adds, some prospects and picks and stuff, not like crazy amounts here, but enough to move the needle, maybe this is a trade that would really benefit both teams. I also kind of look at teams like New York as maybe having a more desperate need for a guy like this. The Rangers are going to try and swing for something, so Winnipeg's going to have a lot of competition if they enter the Peterka race. A guy that could be a little more on the affordable side is Alex Tuch, though. Tuch's got 1 year left. He does have some trade protection of a sort, but if he would be willing to waive and come to Winnipeg, he spent time in Minnesota, so Winnipeg's really not that different. He comes up, maybe he'll have a really good season for the Jets, and perhaps he's a free agent that you re-sign for the longer term. I think the challenge with him is that Buffalo was supposed to be kind of a hometown sort of thing for him, so I don't really know how he feels now, but the rumors of them potentially shopping Tuch does make it seem like they're not really anticipating him sticking around. So for Winnipeg, this could be a really intriguing option. I've also talked about Ryan McLeod before. McLeod, I don't really know if he's going to be on the move. If they start moving guys like Peterka and stuff, I can't really see them jettisoning another prime-aged RFA that can contribute down the middle and who was quite good for them this past season. So let's I guess not get greedy, so to speak. But I've also mentioned Tuch before. He's a real promising guy. Players that I hope they kind of avoid, I would probably avoid Greenway. I like him personally. I don't like him for what the Jets need. Winnipeg needs scoring help, and Greenway is more of like a big two-way defensive type, and also he's paid $4 million. So that's kind of a lot. Not the best situation if you're trying to find some real offense for your middle six. But, man, if this Peterka thing really does pan out, the Jets probably should be pounding the door, trying to get this deal done. If they try and they don't get it, that's fine. I just want to see them really pursue stuff like this because this is a really cool opportunity for Winnipeg to maybe swing big and come away with something special. Now, I also mentioned that there are some other teams we haven't really explored, and one team that I kind of hope the Jets avoid dealing with just because I'm a little concerned about what they would be going for is it's the Montreal Canadiens. And Habs fans, if you're listening, sorry, you're about to get a little bit cooked on this one, but we'll chat about why I would hope the Jets go elsewhere for their shopping in just a sec. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Now, as a Marylander, I personally like the shelled variety of pistachios. They're great, they're easy to crack open, they're tasty. It's kind of like cracking open a blue crab, even if it's more of a nut. But maybe you've got no time, you're on the go, you're dropping your kids off at school, or you need something right before you hit the gym. They've got a great no-shelled variety, and of course they come in some great flavors, and Wonderful Pistachios offer a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are chatting about, some decent trade options out there. I also want to focus on this episode for like the second half, talking about maybe teams that we haven't really looked at and maybe some stuff to just flat out avoid, right? One of those teams that kind of feels like a bit of an avoiding situation is Montreal. Now, apparently, Winnipeg was maybe talking to the Habs at some point this past trade deadline. I don't really know how much there ever was to any of this, but if there was, there was talk about Jake Evans, Josh Anderson, stuff like that. And this is one of those teams that I think the Jets just really need to steer clear of. No offense to Montreal, but a lot of what they have on their roster just doesn't really help the Jets. You've got some players who are decent and maybe fill some nice, niche holes for them. But if you're the Jets, right, Winnipeg, frankly, needs to get and really swing bigger. You look at what's on offer for them. You've got Josh Anderson, who's kind of a declining 30-year-old physical winger. He kind of fits sort of the Lowry mold of player, but just without the really positive impacts. And, I think he's kind of on the market. They haven't really been shopping him like crazy amounts, but we've heard a lot of rumors about the Jets being interested in an Anderson type over the past couple of seasons. And for me, it's just kind of like, no, the assets that you would have to give up to bring in a 31-year-old winger who's decent, he's not bad. And I don't think that that's really how people should look at this, but he's just not a guy that really solves what's wrong with the Jets, right? And I say wrong with the Jets in a very relative sense. Winnipeg just needs more goal scoring help, right? And that's not really something that Anderson is going to bring in. He's had a couple of seasons where he had some shooting percentage spikes, but it's just not really his game. And at $5.5 million per season, kind of pricey, not exactly the kind of player that I think is a guy you want to spend a lot of assets for. Then you also kind of look at maybe like a Kirby Doc type. Doc, I would have some time for. The thing with Kirby is that he's just been bad. Like, I don't know what's happened to him since he left Chicago, but he has really not been anything to write home about. Apparently, during this past season, he had a bit of a spat with the coaching staff when he just didn't react well to some feedback he received. I have no idea what to even make of him. There was some goal scoring potential there. He had some offensive talent, but like his overall game has really been a bit of a shell of itself, right? And it's not like it was really well formed even in the early days with Chicago, but seeing him now with the Habs, it's just kind of been not great. And Doc at this point, I just don't know if he's really long for a big spot in this league. He's kind of an interesting punt if you can get some salary retained, but I would probably look elsewhere, right? You need a real 2C. I would go with somebody with real backing and, some level of I guess track record, maybe that's what I'm looking for, right? Pedigree is perhaps the better way to describe it. Doc, he's on the younger side. I just don't think he's very good. I really haven't seen anything in his game that makes me feel like he's going to be the guy to help turn the Jets around. If the attitude stuff is really true, then that's not going to mesh well with how the Jets are. Winnipeg has become increasingly, accountable and to the point about their performances. They still have some things that they need to work out, but I promise you, Doc's attitude, if, again, confirmed, we don't know that it's 100% true, but if confirmed, wouldn't really align with how this team is. So, I look at this as a situation where, yeah, you could take the risk and punt on it, but, would I really be that happy about it? Probably not. Montreal just doesn't really have a lot of roster players that are super exciting. The one exception that I will say, and sort of, this is kind of like not really the most exciting and sexiest of names, but if you could find a way to get Alex Carrier out of there, Carrier could be really interesting. Now, he's got 2 years left, and he is a little older, but if you're looking for a guy who's a solid two-way puck mover and could probably help out the Jets' third pairing, he's actually legitimately pretty good. The only trick is, obviously the Jets have a lot of defenders on their current roster, and unless Shen wants to go up to Montreal, I can't really see how this would work. But again, of the positions that I would target, the blue line's probably, the most sensible sort of spot. Elsewhere, you just look at this team and you're like, yeah, not really seeing too much to trade for. Another team that kind of fits the sort of trappy mold, and maybe one that has similar sorts of salvage opportunities, but ones that I'm probably not that high on. It's Chicago. Chicago is, well, yeah. You look at their roster, you look at how they performed this past season, and it makes a lot of sense. They don't have a lot. Past Bedard, you've got a couple of decent prospects and some younger players, but yeah, it's a little bit of a grim situation, and Bedard, frankly, just needs help, right? If there was ever a time for them to really start overhauling this team, it's probably over the next year or two. They just need to get these guys some real help because, like, this team has so little to work with, and it's probably why we've heard them talked about as maybe an Ehlers sort of destination. The thing that I kind of worry slightly about is that the Jets are going to be looking at this team, trying to go shopping and make something happen. Winnipeg's had connections to Chicago for forever now, for obvious reasons. We've had guys come from there, including Chevy. But I just feel like, and say Taves comes in, what would you realistically want off this roster? And I look at who's available, and you could try for a Lucas Reichel. Reichel, 23-year-old center, bad. That's the best way to describe it, just bad. He had a really rough season on the ice, and offensively, there is talent there, and maybe something that the Jets could really unearth. But it's a little hard for me to project that to what the Jets are doing and how they play, right? Reichel, again, if you get him out of Chicago, maybe you have a lot more success. And of the players that you could take a swing on, I would probably look more at guys like him, maybe some dudes with legitimate upside. Bork is a little more established for me and is a guy from Dallas that I'm a little higher on. But a Reichel, if it's cheap enough, yeah, I wouldn't hate it. Veleno is maybe a different direction for me. Veleno, this past year with the Hawks, again, like most of Chicago's roster, just bad. He's never really lived up to the exceptional hype and status that really surrounded him. But I mean, as a center, if you're looking for a guy who could play on your fourth line, it's not horrible. I just feel like the Jets already have a lot of players who already offer very similar things to him. The only hope is that, if he gets out of some of these crap teams, that he finally starts to put together some of that offensive potential and skill that he has had for a while. He's just not really been able to show it. But, for a lot of reasons, I'm a little bit skeptical that, that would really translate into anything. The only guy that I think would really be up the alley and somebody that I would be very intrigued by, it's Teravainen. Now, he went back to Chicago and signed for Lord knows what reason. I guess it was comfortable and he wanted to stick around. He is the only player that I would really say I would pay up for. Teravainen, maybe he didn't have the craziest season this past year, but I like him a lot. I know him from his, his Carolina days and, also the early Chicago days. He's a great, great player, and I'm a big fan of his. The past season, honestly, was really pretty decent by what you'd expect from a guy playing on one of the worst offenses in the league. Almost 60 points in 80 odd games. That's pretty solid, right? And clearly he can handle like your 2C sort of duty. He can also play as a wing if you want. I just feel like if the Jets are going for anyone off this team, Teravainen would be the dude. He'd also have to waive his trade protection, but I just wonder how much he actually wants to sit there and sit through this rebuild. But maybe he does. Maybe he's comfortable. Maybe it's just about being in Chicago. He likes the city. There aren't that many reasons to go back and sign there to begin with. So clearly something had to really attract him that may not be as hockey related. So for that reason, this is a team kind of in the Montreal situation where you look at it and you're like, you could maybe force a fit, but probably best if you go shopping elsewhere. Now, speaking of shopping elsewhere, there are two teams that I haven't really talked a lot about recently, but that do actually have some intriguing names that the Jets could be into. I want to chat about the Calgary Flames and San Jose Sharks in a brief moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are chatting a little bit about the Chicago Blackhawks, the Montreal Canadiens. Those are teams that I would probably want the Jets to generally avoid trading with. If I'm looking for teams, though, that are maybe a little bit underrated and some destinations and names that we haven't really chatted about a lot, I'm looking at Calgary and San Jose. Now, these two teams have a lot of challenges, and they have a lot of needs. The Flames and Sharks both are really rebuilding. They're trying to overhaul their roster. And I think the Jets actually have a lot of mid-tier prospects and picks that could make a lot of sense for teams that really need to just bulk up and add volume. Now, the Sharks are slightly in a different spot. They've got lots of picks. I think they could use some real roster bodies, and maybe this is where the Jets have some guys who are kind of just on the cusp of making the NHL, but maybe don't fit Winnipeg's long-term plans. Let's look at the Flames first, though. Calgary is a name that's come up in the past, and they've had a couple of intriguing options. Nazem Kadri, one of the most effective centers in that whole squad, and really one of their best players. I don't imagine that he's too keen to move, but he's 35. He's still putting up pretty crazy results. He has some trade protection, and that could be a bit of a challenge. He's got a no movement clause this upcoming season that becomes a modified no trade after this. But Kadri, he's one of those guys where you'd probably hope for the next 2 to 3 years he can still put up top 6 results. Based on how he's played, I don't think he's really in line to decline that fast. He does play a physical style, and he is, occasionally edgy, but it seems like he's really settled in as a Flame. He puts up top-tier results. He's a great player, and he also has a lot of finishing talent. If the Jets were trying to maybe look for a real 2C option to back up Scheifele, that's kind of like a shadow 1C, and you are willing to swallow the fact that he does have 4 years and he'll be almost 40 by the time the deal ends, this could be a really interesting match. You'd probably have to pay a decent amount because his cap hits only at $7 million, which is really, really modest. I know that the age is kind of a trick, but given how he continues to perform, he does all the stuff that we wanted Brock Nelson to do, but he actually does it well. So, looking at Kadri, I kind of like him as a player a lot. I've sort of warmed up to him again, and I could see a legitimate fit. But again, the Flames would have to want to move him. I don't know if that's really the case. He'd have to want to move. There's a little bit of trickery here. So I don't think he's that likely to get moved anytime soon. But if he is on the block this summer and the Jets maybe go off the board and go for a center that we're not talking about a lot, Kadri would probably be one of my more desired names. Blake Coleman, he's a guy who has had success previously. He's a fast skater. He had really good seasons with the Devils, and with the first couple of runs with the Flames, really did well. I would say, at this stage of his career, I don't know if he's capable of really playing like a 2C role. I think ideally you want him in the 3C spot, but he is still putting up pretty decent numbers, 40-ish, 50-ish points. I would say, again, you'd probably want him more in the middle 6 rotation than like a hard lock 2C kind of thing. But given how the Jets use their middle 6, he would probably fit reasonably well. He's got another year after this one upcoming, just under $5 million. A little on the older side, and that could be a trick with, whether he has a bit of a crash out after this season or next. But again, for a 2-year rental, if you're looking at him as a guy who might be a good stopgap to any sort of longer-term situation with maybe Braden Yeager or something along those lines, Coleman could be a very decent target, and he's got no trade protection. So the Jets could actually make that happen. I don't think he'd really have too many issues playing in Winnipeg. And he's just a good player. I've liked him in the past. I'd be down with it. The Flames, again, I don't quite know what they would want from the Jets. They might be asking for sort of a Lambert return or something. You could talk me into it. If you're moving Lambert, I would probably prefer something a little bigger. But, Lambert's stock also is kind of all over the place. So, I understand if maybe teams don't value him that highly. And I know personally, I probably overvalue him to a point because that's how I am with all of our Jets prospects. But again, if you make it the right return, I am more than willing to listen. I'm also real interested in the Sharks. They've got Venberg for one more season, and Venberg is kind of like my ideal two-way 2C. The only problem with him is that he really doesn't score. That's been a traditional thing with him. It's still kind of a trick with his goal scoring ability. Unfortunately, it's just not that potent, but he's still a good playmaker. I think, if you're looking for a real upgrade on the Mesnikov and somebody who can actually do the 2C role, maybe doesn't put up crazy numbers, but keeps up with Perfetti and whoever else is going to be on that line, I think it makes a lot of sense. Venberg is a productive two-way center. He's a solid setup guy. He has some real strong defensive impacts. I like him a lot. He does have some trade protection, and with the Sharks not really looking to move too many bodies, I don't think. I don't quite know what their plan is for the summer. They've got lots of picks and stuff to work with, so they probably want more rostery kinds of players. I'd be curious to know if they go after a guy like Mason Appleton in free agency. It just sort of feels like the sort of player that they would add to their middle six, and maybe he can do well. Maybe he can kind of bring some of the collegiate success along with Will Smith and Celebrini, but I don't know. Venberg, could be of interest. On their defense, you've got Mario Ferraro. I would avoid that. Ferraro has not been great for them. And sure, it might be a systems thing and also just the Sharks really struggling to defend in general. But for the Jets, I kind of feel like if you're trading for a defender, it should probably be somebody that you can guarantee will upgrade your bottom pairing. If not, don't worry about it. You've got a lot of guys signed already. You need to focus more on offense. That's where the real money is and where the Jets are probably hurting the most. Hopefully, we can find some real goal-scoring help this coming summer because that remains one of Winnipeg's biggest challenges once the playoffs start to roll around. But curious to know if any of these names really pique your interest. Is there anyone that you would go after? Who would you avoid? Drop your thoughts on some of the proposed trade options below and what you would give up for some of them, or talk about some targets that I haven't discussed in the comments section or at my social medias at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.